Now, more reaction to the Conservatives losing 2 seats during by-elections last night. The traditional red wall seat of Wakefield, which the Conservatives won at the 2019 election, is now back in the hands of the Labour Party. And the Liberal Democrats, of course, took Tiverton and Honiton from the Conservatives, overturning an astonishing majority of more than 24,000 votes. Well, let's speak to an opinion polling specialist, David Cowling, someone who's been studying elections for quite some time. David, looking at this swing, am I right in saying the swing, particularly in Tiverton and Honiton, is the largest swing on record for a by-election?
I think the trouble, Tom, is that we've got a couple of things mixed up here. Certainly in terms of absolute numbers, 24,000 plus is, I think, the largest numerically. But in terms of swing, of course, the swing doesn't take account of the size. It forgets the size. So in terms of swing, it's very substantial. It's 29%, but it is not the biggest.
There have been larger swings.
Yeah. So it's getting two things in one's mind. In terms of the total number of absolute votes, 24,000 plus, it is, I think, probably the biggest that's gone. But in terms of swing, no, it isn't.
And looking historically, the Lib Dems have won these sort of seats before. I think particularly the example that Tories like to bring up is Brecon and Radnorshire, which took place in the year 2019, only a few months before the 2019 general election. The Lib Dems took it from the Tories then on an enormous swing, and then the Tories won it back just a few months later.
Being the sad person I am, I've been looking at some of these figures, and over the last 40 years, about 30% of all by-elections in Westminster have changed hands. But of that 30%, 6 out of 10 have gone back to the party at the subsequent general election. And I guess, I think, one can look at history and one can cherry pick for whichever view one has. But one of the things I think some of the 1987 to 92 started off great Conservative victory, 100-seat majority, and then all started to fall apart. The Conservatives started to challenge Margaret Thatcher's leadership, and she eventually went. So it was real turmoil. 8 seats changed hands in that 87 to 92 Parliament. All 8 of them went back to the original party at the 92 general election. Now, that's not to say that that's going to be the pattern, but it is a reminder that these things do happen. And, for example, if I'm not a gambling person, but if I was, I'd be very interested to see what odds I could get on the Conservatives taking back this seat at Tiverton and Honiton, the next general election, when it won't be a by-election, when the Conservatives might lose. But that was one of the safest Conservative seats in the country. And so it may well go back. But of course, the significance is the now.
And that's where the media has been really looking, because it's the scale of the victory for the Liberal Democrats. Wakefield hasn't had so much of a look in all the analysis today, and perhaps that's because it was less unexpected. It was a smaller victory for the Labour Party, and one that, if it was replicated nationally, might not well take the Labour Party into government.
I think that's absolutely right. The Lib Dems mustn't forget, in Tiverton and Honiton, won the seat with this astonishing 29% swing, and they hadn't been in second place for 3 of the general elections, the last general election. So they won from third place.
Yes, the Labour Party came second in Tiverton and Honiton in 2019, in 2017, and the Lib Dems came 4th in 2015, behind both Labour and UKIP.
Yeah, UKIP came second, you're absolutely right. So it was astonishing. So, of course, the drama is there. Wakefield, it was a much smaller majority for Labour to overturn a swing, I think, of about 3.6%, and they did it with 12.7%. And so, of course, in that sense, it was smaller. However, I think its significance shouldn't be underplayed. I mean, it was the first time Labour has won a by-election seat for 10 years. It's the biggest swing that they've had for 10 years. Now, some people might say, oh, well, but look back to 20 years before that and Blair and all the rest of it. Yes, but you have to start from somewhere, so to speak. And the Corbyn legacy for Labour has taken quite some time to sort of, diffuse. So, although it doesn't guarantee an election, I mean, it's a very respectable result, I think, for Labour, and one on which, obviously, they hope they can build on, but also, I think, vindicates a number of polls that of recent months which have been looking at the red wall territories, opinion polls, and showing significant Labour recovery. So this seems to be consistent with it, none of which guarantees a Labour majority. We know they've got to get 124 seats. Just win an extra 100. It's an extraordinary challenge. So nobody is saying that it guarantees them that sort of victory, this result, but it certainly is on the way to them restoring their fortunes as the party that might take the largest single party at the present.
It's interesting, looking at some of the literature. I was in Wakefield earlier this week, and I've been looking at some of the literature that the Labour Party was putting out. They brought about a pledge card, like Tony Blair did in the 1997 election, with sort of local pledges on it. And they listed some of their bringing back bus routes, saving a walk-in health centre, more police on the street, all this sort of stuff. Interestingly, on none of these pieces of literature can I see Sir Keir Starmer. I can see Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, but for the Red Wall territories, are Labour playing a canny game here? Do they recognise that potentially their party leader isn't the man who they want to put front and centre to win back these sorts of seats?
Well, it's a very, very fair question. I suspect there's a degree of truth in it. All political parties, and each political party plays the game here, hasn't it, in the past, where Labour shout across the chamber. Didn't see any photographs of ex-Conservative leader, and everybody goes ho ho ho, and then the other way back. I didn't see the Labour leader, Corbyn. Did he feature and all the rest of it? So none of which answers your question seriously. I think they clearly know that with Keir Starmer, it's not that the people dislike him in the way that they disliked Neil Kinnock and Jeremy Corbyn. It's just they haven't made their mind up about him. Loads and a very significant number of people for the last 2.5 years have actually said don't know, which is quite remarkable historically. So he's not the winner, so they don't put him on.
The watchword pollsters are bringing up, and I've seen several word clouds about focus groups where they've sort of asked people to associate boring. Boring is the big word that people associate with Sir Keir Starmer, which to some extent could be a positive. If everyone else blows themselves up, it's the way that Theresa May became Prime Minister. Yeah. Could Keir Starmer, simply by not exciting opinions either for or against in the vast majority of people in the country, could he just simply by standing still and being boring become Prime Minister?
There is a chance. But I've always been something of a sceptic of those polls which say, which Labour Party leader would you want to go to the pub with? Which party leader would you want to have a meal with? And I think to myself, I want somebody who runs the country. Thank you very much. Who gives national security and the rest of it. I don't want to go to the pub. I didn't want to go to the pub. People wouldn't have wanted to go to the pub with Margaret Thatcher. Good Lord, what a fun-filled evening that would have been. But on the other hand, can anybody deny the impact that she's had on the country and the way she transformed it in the period of time when she was Prime Minister? So I think, boring, he'd like to do better than boring, but if it's boring versus bombast, then I think, the market in bombast from Uncle Boris is actually diminishing. It's not playing as well as it used to.
Well, it'll be really interesting to see how this all unfolds and how members of Parliament interpret these results as well. But for now, David Cowling, thanks so much for talking us through all of those issues there.